So one of the big mistakes that we make in Rhode Island is that we do not understand and value the great resources and talent we have here. People are always looking outside of the state. You know, we happen to have one of the leading national experts on pensions right here, Tom Zagoras, who's a friend and, as I said, a mentor on these issues and others. And so I'll turn it over to you, Tom.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. I have to admit that I feel a little funny following the main event.
I'll say something else now.
Okay, I'm relieved to hear that they'll take the stage back. So, all right. So look, my name is Tom Zagoras. I am I'm actually part of the research faculty at Brown University in the computer science department. I'm also a senior researcher at the Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society at UC Berkeley. The stories that we heard are sad. They're kind of infuriating, and but at the risk of making people a little madder, I'd like to tell you a little bit more. And not just about the New York Times story that was yesterday. I'd like to talk about even the larger picture, the national picture of pensions. You know, since the 1980s, public pension funds around the country have amassed about $4 trillion in pension funds. To put that in perspective, the national output of the United States every year is about $19 trillion. That's a little more than that. So, but here's the thing. It took 400 years to get up to $19 trillion. It only took 40 years to get to $4 trillion. That means, you know, 1/10 the time, they saved up 1/5 the amount. That means that, let me explain though what that means. That means in my lifetime, and yours, there were years, several years, where all of the nation's wealth, all the growth in wealth was actually not invested in productive investments. It was spent on sterile financial assets, right? This is growth that did not happen. I mean, we wonder sometimes what happened to the growth in the country, and a lot of it is that the accounting rules have forced these public pension funds to grow to colossal sums, far beyond what's actually necessary to pay the pensions. And you might say, if there was no other way to pay for the benefits, you might say, oh, this is proof that our nation can't afford these benefits. But I actually think that that's not the case, that there are ways to do it. What is true instead is that we have chosen, or actually our accountants have chosen, a very expensive way to pay for these benefits. And there are only a few politicians around who are bold enough to push back against what is actually quite radical choices that these accountants have made. I first wrote about pensions and funding in 2005, so some time ago. And while I was doing that, I kept reading stuff that didn't make a lot of sense to me. And I thought, I wrote a little bit about how arbitrary these things seemed and how it seemed like we were going about these in the most expensive possible way. And, well, it's a controversial issue, and as a result of writing articles about this, I actually heard quite a lot about it from a lot of people. But it was funny. I found a lot of people complaining about it, but not a lot of people telling me why I was wrong. So last year, the Haas Institute, this think tank in California, published a paper I wrote, a critique of the goal of 100% funding. I wrote that it's not necessary for a permanent enterprise like a government. Because it's not. That it's politically risky to be at 100% funding. That the urgency of the debt is exaggerated by the rules. That the size of the debts should be compared against the next 50 years of growth, not against the next year's budget. There were 8 separate arguments that I made, and because I'm that kind of guy, I actually classified them. They were the legal, chronological, actuarial, mathematical, financial, economical, political, and philosophical. I'm very proud of that, actually. But each one of those categories is a chain of argument. And I heard a lot about that article too. John Arnold, I don't know if you are familiar with the name, he personally insulted me on Twitter, which I'm quite proud of. Although I have to admit, I don't think he actually read the paper. And right now, yeah, I'm very disappointed about that. And right now I have a small research grant from the National Conference of Public Employee Retirement Systems to make a kind of a broader critique of the accounting rules. The full report is actually due in September, although the first draft is finished with that. The research project involved a lot of solicited feedback. You know, I had workshop events in California and Illinois and here I had a couple of actuaries come to the event in California just to tell me how wrong I was. But here's the thing, I've heard a lot of response to these articles over the last 13 years. And here's the funny thing, nobody actually refutes my points. Those 8 arguments, I haven't seen one critic actually take them on and provide me an argument and say, oh no, you're wrong because, right? What they say instead is, and this is the actuaries, the Twitter critics, what they say instead is stuff like, well yeah, but that's not the way we do things, right? Or they say, well yeah, but if we do it this way, it makes the accounting work better. Or sometimes they say, well you're not an actuary, right? And the other one that I think is especially funny is that they say something like, well, fairness requires that we do the accounting this way, which is actually a very funny argument to make in this room. But it is an argument that people make. And, well, it's another way to say what exactly is the quality of the arguments that people make. It's actually not very good. And they say stuff too like, well, you don't want us to end up like Detroit, do you? Which is also a pretty funny thing to say because pension debt didn't bankrupt Detroit, cuts in state aid did. Long-term debt might be a scary thing, but long-term debt is not what makes a cash flow crisis, and that's what put Detroit into receivership. And besides, they say that there's this huge debt. They can't even say who it's to. There's nobody. The $7 billion that is the Rhode Island debt, you can't actually say who it is to. There's nobody who can claim that as an asset on their balance sheet. Nobody gets to book that. It's pretty strange. And anyway, so time is short, and last year's article's online on the Haas Institute website. That's 2 days in Haas. But I'll just run through another bunch of weirdnesses, like being forced to put on a balance sheet a number whose potential error is larger than all the other numbers on the balance sheet, right? So I'm a data guy. Stuff like that is just absolutely offensive. You just don't do that if you want accurate financial reports. Or another one is that, we're at 60% funding or 59% funding or something like that. Something you may not realize is that you can pay off every dime of the debt and every step of the way be at 59% funding, right? That's something that I think people don't realize. That the problem is that some of these measures are quite misleading. The numbers just don't mean what people widely think that they do mean. So what do I want in a governor? I'll tell you what I don't want. I don't want someone who's just the best in the class at coloring between the lines. Right? I want someone who questions why the lines are there and what they mean. And if you don't do that, you're not actually leading. You've just kind of scrambled to the front of the pack. And those are pretty different things. I want someone who, when faced with a policy decision that is going to cause great pain to a large number of citizens, tens of thousands of people are going to ask all the important questions. I want someone who is going to question the experts, question their assumptions, and make damn sure that there isn't any other way before inflicting this pain. We don't have that now, but we could, and that's actually why I'm happy to be here supporting that today. So.